Hello and welcome to my channel. In India, where I go every year for 6 months spiritually developing, I'm called Genie. A few of my Muslim friends call me Shia as well, which I believe is not that complimentary. But importantly, I've been an occultist all my life. And towards the latter end of my life, I understood that if I wished to know more about the art of occultism, it would be wise to look at where a lot of occultism came from. So I went to India. It's where Blavatsky gave us, well, what essentially is the New Age movement. Also, there was another explorer at the same time, more or less the same time, O'Neill, who also brought a lot of the Tibetan philosophy and the Hindu philosophy to the West. So it only made sense to go to India and experience this place myself. Nothing prepared me for what I was about to find. What I found answered many questions, and what I'm going to pass to you is what I've discovered through working with adepts and Jinn masters. I never really understood the Jinn until I went to India. So, having been there and studied the Jinn and worked with adepts, I decided to produce a book. And this book gives you an inside look as to how the Jinn works, how people use them. And as a Jinn master told me, he said to me, "The Jinn are everything. Forget what you know." When I heard that, I just presumed it was overzealous. However, having studied them for 5 years, I can certainly tell you most of everything we know about magic, about materialization, finding the best inside yourself, comes through the Jinn. Namaste. I'd really like to set the scene and give you an idea where I'm coming from with this podcast. My background is trichology and dermatology. I did it my whole life. However, by doing this discipline and this study, I met other scientists, and I also met very learned people. So much so that I studied philosophy one-to-one with a very intelligent and highly qualified Muslim. Ironically, this did not start my interest in the Jinn. However, it gave me an insight into the Muslim mind. We have to understand that back in the Middle Ages, many people sent their children for education within the Arab nations. Essentially, most of our Western philosophy is still alive today due to the Arabs, because at the time, the works of Plato and the other great luminaries was considered to be pagan, and therefore it was destroyed. It was only the Arab universities and the Arabs that kept what is now the cradle of civilization open. So, bearing that in mind, when I was looking for a magical system based on the Jinn, I used the axiom of truth. And how truth can only be defined is by what is repeatable. For example, There are many people out there who believe that gravity does not exist, and they will tell you all sorts of alternatives. This being the case, there is a proof that there is a force, regardless what you call it, that does exist, which affects us. Now, if we have a building, which is say 10 stories high, and we jump off it, due to this force, we will have extreme injury and death. It doesn't matter how many people step off this building, the result will be the same. So we understand the truth of the matter is, if one leaps off a high building, there is a force which acts on you that causes your demise. In the same way, when I was researching the book and I was researching my own spiritual journey, I only dealt with adepts who could repeat what they said and what they did magically. Now, I think this is really important, because somebody pulling the rabbits out the hat once is a good trick. Maybe 2 or 3 times it gets probably a little bit stayed. But after a while, you understand that the truth is the rabbit has never been in the hat. It's under the table somewhere. So when I did my studying, I looked for people who were not pulling rabbits out of hats. And I looked for genuine magic and people who genuinely control the Jinn. So essentially, this is what my book and what this podcast will be about. To start the podcast, I think it's really important that we understand what is the difference between the Jinn and the Christian ideology of Satanism. Well, written in the Bible, the Jewish term Satan usually translates to opponent or adversary. Now, it's really interesting, this, because in the Christian religion, all sinful impulses are regarded to be ushered by Satan. But this is really not quite the case. If we look at the role of Satan, Satan is in fact an angel allotted by God. One of his own boys, so to speak, is promoted or demoted to Satan, who then challenges the believer. Now, this is aptly described in the book of Job, where Job is challenged by a Satan. However, this is done in the full knowledge of the God. So we really have to rethink what this is about. Moreover, when people talk about the Satan and his hordes in heaven, there is no referencing in the Bible as to hordes in heaven and wars in heaven. But there is in John Milton's Paradise Lost. So again, we have to rethink what are actually demons, what is actually the devil. If there is no evidence within the Bible that suggests about this cataclysm that caused a great split and the Satan came down to earth, then perhaps we need to revise what we think the Satan is. So on the other hand, what is the Jinn? Now, there are many theories with Jinn. One of the academic theories is that the Iblis who is the, if you like, the godfather of the Jinn, is not quite what you think. Al-Jinn literally translates to human, and Iblis translates to made of clay. So there are many academics who believe that the Jinn are a secondary race of humans. So we had the bloodline of Adam, and we have the bloodline of the Iblis. And this is really interesting because this completely contradicts all what we understand the biblical narrative. And it turns everything on its head. You know, for example, there is the serpent in the garden. Is this a figurative description or is this a literal description? So when we are discussing the Jinn, we are discussing a completely different ideology to what we think is of Satanism. Like I've said, we've got the Iblis, who is believed to be another form of human. However, when they die, their spirits form what we understand as the spiritual Jinn. And then I presume from the spiritual Jinns, we can then get the variations of Marid, Ifrit, or these types of other Jinns. Now, interestingly, if you read the Arab law, they describe the Jinn as living in a place called the Kaf, and the Kaf surrounds the earth, and they come through the Kaf to a mountain range in Oman where they spread throughout the earth. So there is a massive difference between what people call Satanism and the Jinn. The Jinn are described as smokeless fire. However, they're also described as human as well. So all these things have to be borne in mind when you're examining something like the Jinn and the Jinn magic. I don't know whether or not the Abyss is in fact the father of a second race of human. I don't know that. Maybe it's just, if you like, some kind of metaphorical way of explaining why we have humans who are quite demonstrative and murderous and other humans which are not. However, this is very important to understand because this is really part of what makes the Jinn mythos extremely interesting. It's not clean cut. There are many options as to what it can and what it can't be. However, the other side of the coin is that there is proof that Jinn magic and Jinn worship does provide results. So whatever this system is, whatever the ethos of this system is, whatever the history of this system is, the fact remains adepts who practice this system get results. So this is something very important to remember when we are starting to discuss the Jinn. Namaste.